All right, so today's book is Trillion Dollar Coach, written by Eric Schmidt, Jonathan Rosenberg, and Alan Eagle. Trillion Dollar Coach is a biography about Bill Campbell, one of the most influential behind the scenes figures in Silicon Valley. He went from being a coach of an undersupported team to being CEO of a few companies. He went in mid level and just built up swiftly, just within a few years, and then going from CEO going into being on the boards of Apple, Google, and Intuit, if I remember correctly. I'm not going to talk so much about the details. A lot of the things can be simple Google searches. Loosely speaking, the writers of the book were executives of Google, people who have been personally touched by Bill. And Bill was somebody who didn't want a book written about him, evidently. It wasn't until after he passed away that they pulled the trigger and decided to do this. Um, as they express in the beginning of the book, they feel that it was something that he would have approved. And after reading the book, I want to agree with him, but I'm not so sure. He didn't seem like somebody who wanted to be in the spotlight. He was someone who liked to be in the background, who liked to really personally connect with people, who didn't really want, all the attention and whatnot. Um, but as I mentioned, I mostly just want to talk about things that were impactful from this book, things that were good lessons, things that have already helped me out interacting with coworkers, with people, just in general. And that being said, this book is really made for leaders. As they bring up, you cannot be a successful manager these days without being a good coach. It's just not something that can happen anymore, as far as they describe. And as they emphasize right in the beginning of the book, this quote: "Your title makes you a manager. Your people make you a leader." So it comes down more so to actual connection with the people, getting them to, really not appreciate you, but really respect you, want to follow you, someone who leads by example, someone who is expressive, somebody who is honest with themselves and others, someone who isn't, just isn't expressing all their own insecurities onto other people around them, because that's half the problem people have most of the time. It's just they can't deal with their own shit and they put it on others, and it just causes all this strife and friction. So anyway, so in that notion, as they say, it's the people. The job of any manager is for their people to succeed. So there are books now on the concept of servant leadership, but there's a lot of studies and books that are now written that somebody like Bill Campbell was just doing instinctually. He just understood it on a deep level, and it just came to him naturally. Like, one thing that's amazing about him is the fact that he could just hug anybody and nobody saw it as creepy, seemingly. Like, that's honestly pretty amazing. Like, he would come up and just bear hug people he had never met before. I forget exactly what company it was, but there was a guy who while going onto the board, I want to say it was Intuit. While going onto the board, he had basically violated what is it, a non-compete with the previous company he worked for. That wasn't mentioned what that was. And so it was almost a year of litigation, if I remember correctly, just all this money. And so this guy was finally at kind of a work meeting, I think, and Bill came up behind him, having never met the guy, just hugged him just as hard as he could from behind. He's like, "You're the best. You're the son of a bitch who cost me all that money." So he's someone he was so expressive. He brought love into the workplace, as they described, which is almost paradoxical, as they bring up in a place like Silicon Valley, where it's so cutthroat and just vicious. Everyone just going after each other, just going for that next spot. So he was someone who was able to be expressive. He would, like, in the middle of board meetings while the CEO is talking, he'd be sitting there, he'd just smile at him and wink at him. And, like, not in like a sarcastic way, just like he really did love these people. He really cared for everyone that he coached. And that is just something that I personally have never seen from a manager, except for maybe the last ambulance company I worked for. The manager there, John, he was someone who he didn't have to any extent the composure that someone like Bill Campbell did, but he was someone who he did really love us. I'd imagine he saw us almost as kids in some fashion, and you could tell when he would talk to us, there was compassion there. Sometimes it worked out to the disadvantage of the company, just because there'd be a few near to well employees that would kind of go by the wayside, because he didn't want to bring down the hammer, he didn't want to do any of that stuff, but it really did create a good environment, and he was someone who truly cared. That aside, coming back to Bill Campbell, so he was someone who really focused on not efficiency, because efficiency can be construed as cold, But he was somebody who, he wouldn't let people get away with their own bullshit. If they had some huge problem that they weren't focusing on, he would never let them stray away from it. It would be directly to that problem, the elephant in the room, as they called it. It would be, if there was the biggest problem that they were being faced with, that came front and center. Everything else went by the wayside. That needed to be tackled. So his approach most of the time is he would not give advice. He would listen, and that was a big thing that I've taken from this, is active listening. I mean, like, I've seen it described in, 100 times in 100 ways in 100 different books, but for some reason it didn't really click until this one. I think having like almost like a persona or somebody to embody behind the notion, behind the lesson, I feel like that helped more so to kind of get it to be instinctual within me. Which, that being said, I don't think I'm that good at it yet. Anyway, so he would really actively listen. Like, he would, put away everything. If you were the subject of the moment, you were all that mattered to Bill. You were who he was talking to. I mean, like, he also coached a girls' flag football team that was middle school. And there was one story, and there was this guy attested that Bill was coaching the team. His phone rang, he looked at it, it was Steve Jobs, and he just silenced it and put it away. Because when he was there for you, you were all that mattered. He was someone who he would just totally brush off, these huge Silicon Valley billionaires, because it didn't matter. That's not who he was talking to. That being said, they also emphasized if you ever had a problem, Bill was the first guy. He was always there for you. He was always there to listen, always there to talk, always generous. And that is just, again, he just sounds like an amazing person. Not to be this guy, but it is really unfortunate I won't get a chance to meet him. Hopefully, in good time, we'll be able to meet some of the people who actually worked with him, some people who actually, were impacted by him. But he would have all the focus on you. So he made everything from one-on-ones to, to board meetings, to flag football teams, to anything. Wherever he was focused and present, and he was there for the person he was talking to. He emphasized, you can only coach the coachable. In one context, there was a guy they were going to bring on as CEO, if I remember correctly. Again, I'm not going to be really on point with the details. I'm more just kind of taking it all together, and it's been a little bit since I've read this. But he was taking him on, and so he asked him directly, are you coachable? And the guy threw out some random quote, or kind of was like thrown off by the question, and Bill just got up and just started to leave. Because if somebody can't listen, then they just, they're not going to succeed. They're not going to make it. If they can't be coached, if they can't be talked to, if they can't listen, they're fucked, honestly. I mean, like, you can be a genius, but if you set fire to the team and you're purely toxic, it's not going to matter. You're going to be out of there. Eventually, in good time, in a good company, you'll be out of there. That being said, they did talk about managing the aberrant genius. Aberrant? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not actually familiar with that word. But essentially, if there was the person who was a genius, they were incredibly productive, they had brought extreme value to the company, but they were that kind of, just jackass, cocky, accomplished, capable person. They emphasize cultivating them and protecting them to the extent that they bring value to the company. The moment they're just screwing over the team, they're out of there. No matter how valuable they are, they can't be that valuable. If they're setting the company on fire, it really is not going to bring you any value. It's really not going to bring your team any value. It's not going to bring anything any value. And I mean, it would go into everything where he would talk about, this is actually a lot of stuff that is echoed in the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is also an amazing book. I'll probably do a review on. I only have an audiobook right now. I got to get the physical one, which my bookshelf's a little empty because I keep loaning books out. Where they talk about, when you're going to compensate somebody, it's not really about the money. It's really about how they feel. I mean, you could have people who are already making millions per year, and when they do a really good job, they're kind of hoping that they'll get a little bit more money. And it's not so much because they need it. They don't need like a new car or something. What they really need is, well, not need, but what they want is that validation. The money is just a representation of the validation. So, yeah, I mean, so it was... He would go from there. He would go into notions of like, you can't, he was very direct. If there was going to be, if somebody did completely fuck up, he would walk over and directly tell them, you completely fucked up. You'd say phrases like, that's the sound of your head coming out of your ass, when they'd like finally figure something out. And the thing was, though, is that he did it in such a way, and he presented himself in the situation in such a way where people knew that he cared. And in some fashions, as it was described, it kind of took the weight off their shoulders. It brought them relief that it was like, there's someone that's validating this. And I think that's kind of a mistake, especially reading this. It's kind of a mistake some people make, is when some people will they'll stumble, they'll fuck up. Sometimes they just want somebody to be there to be honest with them and just say like, yeah, you fucked up. You're better than this. You can do more. It's like, get up and try again. You're better than this. You can do it. That's why you tried in the first place. You can do it. And that kind of leads into the other element of him. So he would be very direct with people. He was very loving, but he always believed in people far, far more than they ever believed in themselves. And that was one of his greatest traits, as they described it, as far as being a coach. He was somebody who would push people to not to their limits, because they didn't know their limits. I mean, he didn't know their limits either, but he just keep pushing them. He inspired them to be more. And he would do this a lot of the time through kind of the Socratic method. He would just ask questions. So, as I think I started to stumble into the explanation before, most of the time when he was talking with somebody he wouldn't give advice, he wouldn't tell them what to do, or his advice would come in the notion of a story. So he would listen to their problems, he would really listen, and he'd ask not leading questions, but he'd ask questions that would get down, very minutely to the source problem, what's really going on inside their heads, what's really stopping them, what they really need to do. Because he took the approach that most people already know the answer. A lot of the time we're just tripping over ourselves, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot because we have an emotional reaction, and aside from love, aside from compassion, understanding, I guess understanding isn't really, but he was a very emotional guy in that fashion. He was super expressive of his emotions, super expressive of his love. And so he would sit there and talk with them. They have these one-on-ones, and you have a whiteboard where he, write down the main points of the one-on-one, and they'd start refining things down. They'd have everything they needed to talk about, so it could be just like directly on point, directly just knocking down the issues. And he'd sit there and he'd just ask them questions till they boiled down the real problem. And he might tell them a story of just some situation in his life. And this is the challenge of being a coach if you're somebody who doesn't have that much experience in whatever you're coaching in, because you don't always have answers. You don't always have a story to tell, which is no big deal. The more you learn, the more you try, the more you'll have. But so you might tell them a story, and then he would just continue asking them questions. He would never just say like, yeah, no, you need to do this. That's the answer. Just do it. And I feel like that's a problem most people have. I've had that problem tons of times, because I've read a good amount. And if I'm talking to somebody, they have an issue, it took me a very, very, very long time to learn that people just want to vent about their problems. They want to be asked about their problems. They don't want a solution. They don't want, not help, that's the wrong way to phrase it, but they don't want an answer. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like they're being listened to. And that was something that, again, it took me a very long time to figure that out. And then, one more thing, because there is just so much I can go through in this list, so much I can go through in this book. I would really recommend that you check this one out. You can skim it. You can, dive deeply into it. I read it in a week. I just sectioned out to 30 pages a day and burned through it, but that seemed to help my retention. It's something I'm kind of trying with. But yeah, you know what? I don't want this video to get too long. So he's someone, again, I feel like the biggest thing, though, is the fact that he was somebody who listened. He was somebody who truly cared, which is very rare. Apathy, and not in the Stoic Greek proper version of it, but apathy in kind of like the modernized, misplacement of the term, where it is just like devoid of emotion. It's destructive. It like, especially with others, because like there's this weird notion that like people treat apathy like, oh, it's a good thing, like I'm fucking cool because I don't give a shit. But it's only gonna hurt you. It's not gonna help you at all. At the most, you'll get like some girlfriend who wants to fix you, and that's never gonna end well, because you don't want to be fucking fixed. So, that was one of the biggest things here, is truly give a shit. Actually care about people you're talking to. Actually listen to them. And like that leads into one more thing, because I won't talk too much here, but it leads into one more thing where you talk about they talk about trip reports, where every time they got together for meetings, at the beginning of meetings, not so just it would run efficiently. That was kind of a byproduct. They would all talk about what their weekends were like. They would talk about, their kids' like baseball games and stuff like that. They would talk about like a hike they went on, or like some island they flew to, whatever. It's, they're all rich at that point. So I mean, I'm sure they can afford some things. But they'd all talk about that, and they'd really care. And they, you know, talked about like a few executives learned from Bill to have like the elevator chat, you know. So when they got in the elevator with somebody, they just start asking about their lives and mostly asking questions, because it's difficult to not do that whole thing where when you talk to somebody, you like, it's natural to want to wait for your chance to talk. You know, you wait for your chance to like get in there and say like, and have that thought in your head of like, oh, you know, well, this too, that too, you know, especially if you're some jackass like me who reads a lot, because you probably have a lot to talk about. A lot of which that people either don't care about or might not understand at all times. And so they emphasize, you know, talking to people about themselves, talking about their families, talking about, you know, their interests and whatnot, where they want to go with their lives, and like what they really want, you know, because a lot of people, especially these days, we get so obsessed with, you know, specialty approaches to things. So they'll kind of just give you the answer that's like kind of a half-assed answer. I mean, like I had a friend that I worked in the ambulance with, and when he was like first new, I remember talking to this guy, and he was going for nursing, and he's an awesome dude, and I don't think this is the wrong answer for him. I think, you know, I think he should do it if it's what he wants. But, you know, he had gone through culinary school in the past. And so I was talking to this guy, and I asked him, like, oh, what do you want in life? You know, like, what do you want to do? And he told me, he's like, oh, you know, I think I might like go for nursing. You know, might go like LVN, then go into RN and all that. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. But like, what do you want in life? You know, like, what do you really want? And he's just like, yeah, maybe I'll go like nurse or like nurse practitioner. And he kind of just like upped it a little bit, you know, just like a little bit higher the specialty. And I was like, yeah, man, that's awesome. But like, and like, I don't like asking this question because I don't really have an answer for it. But like, if, you know, if money wasn't an issue, if you could do whatever the fuck you wanted, what would you do? And his answer, after asking like 3 or 4 times, and finally boiled down, he's like, oh, well, I would love to have a restaurant. You know, he was an excellent chef. He's a super cool guy, and he could fucking cook. We'd be at station, and he would make food, and this dude could cook. He knew how. You know, he made some good food, and that's the thing. But he really wanted to have a restaurant, but he was going for nursing, and a lot of the time, our values, our experience, and our approaches misalign. And I don't want to be one of those people that, you know, like, oh, it's in the universe and all that stuff, because I'm not sure how much I buy those things. And I'll get into all that stuff in another video. I won't talk about that now because this is already getting too long. But essentially, coming back to the book, Bill was an incredible man. He was a loving man. He was someone who truly cared. He was somebody who brought out the best in others. He would pump the brakes when somebody got too emotional. He would make sure everybody was heard. And, I mean, lack of a better say it, he was just an incredible human being. I really recommend this book, not even for the learning aspect, but just to get a glimpse at what a pure soul can be, at what an incredible person can be, somebody who is very candid in their approach to everything, from bringing out people's inner confidence to be themselves, and to just honesty. It's such a rare asset in its purest forms. It's the rarest thing. So if there's anything you could strive for, it's being compassionate, truly caring, loving, and being truly honest with others about yourself, about others, about how you feel, about what you think is right. Just being completely humble and honest, being coachable, always learning. Just like, again, this book has too many values and too many lessons for me to fit into any kind of video, but this has already gotten way too long. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Again, $1 Trillion Coach by Eric Schmidt, Jonathan Rosenberg, and Alan Eagle. I'm so sorry, Alan. I really recommend it. Check it out, rent it, whatever. Just get the book, read it. It's an amazing book. Have a great day, guys. Till next time.